Hey everybody, it's Open World Chat. I'm John Odom, one of your hosts. With me is Mark Card, my
All right, I'm
co-host.
around. Let's go.
Yeah, well, anyways, we're going to dive right into it. Ever since Alice took the red pill, genre stuff has been on drugs or around drugs. So we're going to talk a little about drugs and drug culture in sci-fi in particular. So let's get high on drugs here. Mark,
Yeah.
I know this was originally an idea that you wanted to play around with. So what did you have in mind when you brought it up? I know you had a couple examples you really wanted to talk about, and there's certainly plenty we could, but there's some big ones that shouldn't be missed. So what do you got?
The one that I really started out with was Dune. The entire culture of Arrakis is centered around spice.
Hmm.
And essentially, the entire culture of that universe is
Right,
centered around spice.
right. It's exactly
And
what I was going to say. The whole
yeah,
universe is dependent on it.
commerce, the political organization of the universe. Without space travel, you couldn't have these giant guilds, and you can't have space travel without the spice. So the spice is life; it's everything. And of course, that whole series of books centers around the planet that's the origin of spice, Arrakis. Arrakis is key to the entire culture, and drugs are the key to the entire planet.
Right. It's about control, who controls, and the power that the spice creates that is not necessarily all good. Or I shouldn't say,
All
yeah,
benevolent.
or it's weird. Let's put it that way.
And, you have to trace this back to Frank Herbert and the period in which he's writing. He's writing during the 60s counterculture when drugs are becoming more and more mainstream and coming out of coming from smaller communities which have embraced it for a long time. And whether you're talking about the arts, or science or government, drugs play a bigger role. You have the war on drugs. You have the MK Ultra experiments in the 50s and 60s. The CIA does to try and find a way to brainwash people and create sleeper agents. And it's in songs, it's in movies, it's in art, it's everywhere. And you even have the whole LSD revolution. Go back and read People should just go back and read all the diverse kinds of people who took LSD in the 60s before they made it illegal. I mean, you would never think this, but Timothy Leary once said he admired Johnny Cash because he thought he was the only person in the world who'd taken more LSD than he had.
Yeah.
And you're talking about an icon of country music, generally a very conservative kind of political set of artists. And he's like, tripping balls all the time.
Right. Which is sort of another angle that we're not really going to get into, but is the drug culture around sci-fi itself and all the
Yeah.
folks who were tripping and going to see 2001. I was just looking at a list of best sci-fi movies to trip or to watch while you're tripping. And that was, of course, at the top of the list, but right in the middle of that time. So there's that type of drug culture, but what can you say about that?
But the thing is, Dune doesn't exist as a work of literary, construction without drugs being at the center of the story.
Hmm. Absolutely. It's just,
So that's what made me think of this. And then I started thinking about the different impact, and some of these are just mentions in movies or mentions
hmm
in books, but they can be kind of, at least, it's Chekhov's drugs sometimes. They'll
hmm
mention a drug and then it's going to show up at some point down the road with some minor or major plot point. But drug culture really kicks in,
Yeah,
especially in the 60s and 70s in science fiction. But as we talked about, it predates it. It does. It goes all the way back to Alice in Wonderland.
sure, sure. Yeah. I think one of the interesting things in Dune too is if you really megadose, you take enough spice, you're going to become a navigator,
Yep.
which are these. completely disconnected from anything except space, really. That's they've had in it, you could think of it as they've had their consciousness expanded so much, which is also, the what people are trying to do when they take psychoactive drugs is expand that consciousness. So he was,
or meditation.
ooh, it's tough to meditate on. Well,
No, no, I'm talking about the ancient Buddhist technique of things like Vipassana meditation. The entire point of meditation is to expand your consciousness and become completely selfless.
okay, right. Yeah.
When you're completely selfless, you become part of the wider universe. You get rid of your ego, you become part of the wider universe. And I think that's kind of might be a metaphor that he's talking about with the navigators. These
Mhm.
people have taken so much spice, they breathe in it, they live inside containers that have the vapors, the gas of spice all the time. Now, of course, it has terrible effects on them and turns them into these horrible, misshapen, grotesque figures that no longer have limbs, and
Well,
they're
which is also part of a function of them being developed in zero gravity too. Their limbs
yeah,
elongate, stuff like that.
but the spice itself transforms them, and
Yeah.
that transformation happens to a certain degree with the people who live on Arrakis. They all have blue eyes
Hmm.
from ingesting so much spice. And it's nice that's a way you can kind of distinguish between the outside invaders and between the colonialists and the indigenous people. The indigenous people are around it so much you can physically see the effects of the drug on them.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
it's at the culture both in terms of a benevolent and a malevolent effect in Dune. And it's not just the one book or the three books, it's all of them.
Hmm.
That kind of dependence on a psychoactive substance is you can't have the books. You can't have the books without that that in it.
Right, right. I think another one you can't talk about when you talk about science fiction and you're talking about drugs is Substance D from A Scanner Darkly.
Definitely.
Philip K. Dick, who is, of course, a pretty out there writer when he gets going. And I think this is a little more consistent with what you see in most cases. Dune is really kind of an outlier, and in some ways, Substance D looks much more like a traditional addiction drug,
Yeah.
although it does horrible things to your brain, which the story depends on. But you see the culture in that looks a lot like the culture of, heroin, the culture of,
Sure. People willing to do whatever it takes, horrible things to themselves and to other people to get a hold of the substance.
yeah, yeah, and just being total junkies in a very recognizable way.
And wrecking their lives and the lives of people around them
Hmm. Hmm.
with almost no benefit at all to anyone except those who want to sell and distribute it.
Yep. Or having your life wrecked well, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't give away the key conceit of the book. I can't believe I almost said that. I almost said something that would have never mind. Never mind. I didn't say that.
Yeah, there are probably going to be spoilers in this discussion.
You can't do a spoiler with a Dick book, though. Dick book.
Well, no, 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 I get that because
It's terrible. That's just a terrible thing to do to somebody.
they are very twisty. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't want to reveal those twists.
Exactly.
Let me think of a couple of others just to kind of off the top of my. Oh, were you done talking about?
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, go ahead. Dive in whenever you want.
what's interesting is that people talk about substance D and they say, oh, well, this is a metaphor for depression or depravity or some other kind of horrible condition that starts with D. Who knows why he called it substance D, but I don't think it's necessarily a metaphor for that. Let's see. Let's talk about Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, that's an important one to mention. Yeah, why don't you go ahead? But
Well, it's pretty clear in Clockwork Orange that drugs have all been made legal
mhm.
because these guys are going out to milk bars and getting their milk dosed with this drug, Moloko Plus. And evidently, it's the kind of drug they use to fuel themselves up before they go out to do a bit of the old ultra violence. And so these guys are all, this is a recreational drug that they use before they go out to rape and pillage and kill and steal and do whatever they're doing.
Hmm. Which, that brings a question to mind. When you have drugs presented, well, okay, don't drugs in a lot of fiction and a lot of reality, aren't they looked at as something that once you get going, once you're addicted, they take away your free will. They take away your freedom of choice. You're addicted to this. It motivates you. It drives you, and you lose yourself in it.
Well,
So
or go ahead.
no, that's a bit of a problem in a way to drop that into a Clockwork Orange, which is all about free will and making the decisions that you want. I mean, you could
Well,
say,
but you notice nobody gets addicted to it. Yeah,
true,
no,
right?
nobody's addicted to it. It's just a recreational drug.
Yeah,
And in fact, I think the implication is the violence is the drug.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That the violence
Right.
is the drug, and the Ludovico treatment
Ludovico.
is the cure for that addiction to violence. Of course, taking away somebody's free will is the ultimate act of violence against
Right,
them,
right.
whether it's physical or not.
Hmm.
Denial of somebody's free will is an act of violence, especially in this book, because individual liberty is the primary driver of this movie. I mean, of the book and the movie
Right.
is, it's society. And this is the thing. Drugs can be used as a metaphor for lots of things. And one of the things, we'll talk about it in a minute, in one of the books, drugs are used as a method of governmental control. In,
Yeah, and that's something, there's a lot of ways the government can control, and that's
right.
something you see pop up in various forms for sure.
Yeah. So, or drugs are a way for corporations to control people as
Hmm.
an extra governmental form of control, as a social or a corporate method of control.
Hmm. Hmm.
And these kinds of ideas, they show up in real life. There is the conspiracy theory that crack cocaine was developed to kind of create a genocide for African Americans.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and you
And
can
you
certainly
also,
see why that, sense.
oh, certainly you can understand why people might believe that,
Yeah, absolutely.
uh, considering the history of uh, governmental and social institutions in the United States doing that from the very beginning.
Hmm.
And then you also see kind of the opposite effect. And this, I said, this is going to be more like in real life examples, but I'm sure you can find these in science fiction, because ultimately science fiction reflects reality. Is the idea like, well, when we talk about AIDS,
Hmm.
the same conspiracy, the same time frame, the 80s has this conspiracy that AIDS was unleashed as biological warfare against black folks.
Sure.
And I don't know. I think you can make an even broader argument that lack of spending on education and healthcare and social welfare is a method of that kind of governmental control.
Hmm. Hmm.
But anyway, let's get back to science fiction. I just think that if you look at yeah, Moloko is not depicted as an addictive drug. It's not depicted as a drug which ruins your life. It's depicted as a way for you to prepare yourself to go out and, wreak havoc on society.
That's true. It's not depicted as something that takes away your free will in any way. So
And,
it's
and in
interesting that
fact,
drugs were used since they usually are looked at that way, but it's not really presented that way. So I take back my musings on contradictions there.
well, here's the thing. You're not really talking about contradiction, I don't think. I think what you're talking about is paradox. because the fact is, most people who use drugs don't get addicted. It doesn't ruin their lives. It doesn't take things away from them.
In real life. Right.
That's right. In reality.
Yeah.
And so you should be able to find this kind of layered, nuanced understanding of drugs in the culture as well,
Mhm.
in science fiction movies and films and books, or books and films and other media. See what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. I do.
So we should definitely, when we consider drugs and drug culture and science fiction, look at more realistic depictions of them because, gotta face it, a whole bunch of health problems get fixed with drugs too.
Hmm. Hmm.
I just thought of another one. Let's talk about that. I thought of another one, and it's an obligatory mention of Star Trek.
Oh, which one? Because I have one in mind too.
City on the Edge of Forever.
Drug. I'm thinking of a, oh, well, when there's the Cordrazine, the,
Cordrazine.
mhm.
So they have somebody go crazy on the bridge, and they're going to give him this calming drug, this tranquilizer. And what happens? Well,
Megadoses by
yes,
accident.
McCoy gives himself a megadose by accident
Hmm.
and runs off and jumps through the Guardian. And here, it's drugs, which normally have a beneficial use, have gone crazy.
Yeah.
And they actually, spoiler alert for a 60-year-old TV show, caused the end of the Star Trek universe.
Yep.
And so, again, this is a reflection of that situation that we have in real life. You've got
Hmm.
cordrazine in the Star Trek universe, which is generally a beneficial drug, unless you get a giant dose full, and then it makes you paranoid, schizophrenic, and accidentally end the universe.
Right.
And
That's,
so you have this nuanced depiction of both the benevolent and malevolent side of drugs.
yeah, that's true. I never thought of it that way, but that's a really good point. And, Star Trek has been around so long that you're going to find, several examples of that.
Oh, definitely. I think you got,
What
I
was
think
the
you have
one where everybody gets in the next generation, everybody gets addicted? Is it an attempt of mind control in that little game? Oh, you know
yes.
which one I mean, right? And it's
Yeah,
all
yeah.
I
The one
think
where you have to
Wesley
put the
episode.
the, the
Wesley and
balls in the cones.
yeah, exactly. And Wesley has to save the day, which that's fun.
Well, and then Star Trek gets into digital addiction too
Mhm.
with the holodeck.
Yeah, you're right with Barkley.
And so
Sure.
here you're talking about, but not just Barclay, there's also Nog after he loses his leg
Hmm.
in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, and Deep Space Nine also gives us a very strong example of drugs used for control, as addiction used as
Yes.
control. And that's Ketracel White, which I mean that's what it's all about, is controlling the Jem'Hadar uh, to make them into these. Well, I mean, and what's interesting is the Jem'Hadar don't see it as any particular problem, except in some cases that they start developing as a storyline. But they are completely slaves to this drug that's produced. The production of it is critical to the entire Dominion, and
Well, I mean, this is the way you create a race of warriors. It's
mhm.
fight and continue to get Ketracel White or die.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is conscription from birth.
It's such a part of life that it doesn't occur to them necessarily
Well,
how
they
much they're
don't they
being.
don't know any better.
They don't know any better. They
It's like
don't.
us and water. If we
Mhm.
stop drinking water, we die. So
Mhm.
we know we always have to drink water. With them, the same thing is true. We've got to have our Ketracel White or we die. So
Yeah.
they don't see it as an addictive drug because it's not. They see it as an essential to survival.
Now
But
that's one where I don't know that it's necessarily all that metaphorical when you get right down to it, because there isn't exactly a parallel. There are things that are close, but there isn't exactly a parallel in real life. That might I see that as more science fiction, just telling us a story rather than really talking about or reflecting on drug culture.
Oh no, I agree. My point was that the way the Jem'Hadar look at it is it's the same as water.
Hmm.
Because they have to have it to survive, and they've known they've had to have it to survive
Hmm.
their whole lives. They don't know any difference. So they don't know that they're addicted to a drug, but the shapeshifters at the top, they do know it is. And that's the whole, so they know this is a matter of social control, but
Hmm.
the social control is so pervasive to the existence of the Jem'Hadar, they don't know they're being drugged.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. Um,
I just thought of another great example of this. And we've already talked about it in terms of science fiction that doesn't know it's science fiction.
mhm.
Well, what's the thing that deprives you of your precious bodily fluids in Doctor Strangelove?
Oh, fluoride.
Fluoride in the water.
That's funny.
And without the fluoride in the water, the colonel who's in charge of the Air Force base that sends his crazy message out to the bombers to drop bombs on Russia. Well, that is a drug and that is a method of social control. It's
Mhm.
a beneficial method of social control because fluoride in the water strengthens your teeth, but it's still a drug and it's still being used as a social control.
And what do you think about where do you see? Oh, wait, before we get too far,
Yeah,
one obligatory mention we've got to make is Brave New World.
definitely. Soma is the drug there.
Yeah, we can't get too far in this episode without talking about that.
Well, and this is the ultimate metaphor for terrible addiction
Hmm.
and addiction as a use of social control. The government has everybody hooked on Soma,
Yeah.
and it gives you ultimate euphoria and bliss, and you don't question the government, and you do the things you're supposed to do, and you go to work, and you do all those things, and you don't ask questions, and you become a drone to society.
Hmm.
And then once you get off the drug, holy crap, you see just how terrible and how totalitarian society really is.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the interesting thing is, when is Brave New World published?
Now, when was it published?
I want to say it's 49.
49?
I think it was
Oh, really? That far back?
published in 1932.
32.
32.
Whoa. That's a while ago.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, and that's been so influential in everything we're talking about here.
well, you can apply this to a lot of things.
Hmm.
Talked about digital addiction. Huh. Where's your phone, John? Where,
Believe it or not, I don't have it on me, so I guess I'm not addicted.
Well,
That's
I have an excuse because mine's right here, and the only way I don't have Wi-Fi, so the only way I can connect to the net is to plug it into my computer. So yeah, of course, yes, that's the reason why it's sitting right next to me. Of course it is. Yeah, that's the ticket.
drugs and drug culture as something apocalyptic
Yep.
that you've got there. And that's another angle you'll see in sci-fi. What I'm thinking of is actually just to get a little more granular with it is the Doctor Who episode
Yeah.
Gridlock, which is a lot of fun. It was season three, excuse me, series three of the of the new Doctor Who's with David Tennant, and the it's not a key part of the actual narrative of the story, but a key part of the setting of the story involves New York, the citizens of New York, the leaders of New York, the government of New York, who become addicted or became addicted because they're all dead because it was apocalyptic, hence the comparison here. They're all dead because of their misuse of these patches that imbue you with different emotions. And this one in particular, which was just blissful emotions that everyone basically became hooked on, and they didn't even notice that it was spreading a virus, and everybody died.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of the setting. But this drugs as apocalyptic is another thing that really is given to us in a sense by Strange New Worlds or
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because
Strange New Worlds, Brave
everybody is
New World.
if everybody is
We were
on
talking
this
Star Trek.
if everybody's on this Soma holiday, they can't see what the government's doing to them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Can't see that the government has crept into every facet of their lives and controls everything they do. And
Right.
once you get clean, you realize, holy crap, government does everything for us.
Yes, an apocalyptic dystopia, though.
So we're going to talk about that again when I mention my last one. And I think you know which one I'm going to talk about, but we'll see if the audience can
Actually,
figure
I don't know which one you're going to talk
it
about.
out.
It's going to
Good.
be the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster, isn't it?
I know that reference actually.
Of course you do, as do all good folk.
Uh,
Yeah,
well,
you can only
let's
have
see.
two of them.
I've got one or two others here.
Well, while you're talking, while you're looking at your next thing, um, drugs as power
Yeah.
is another thing. Drugs is and that can go positive or negative. I mean, that goes back as far as the super soldier serum. Captain America,
Captain
because
America,
comic
that,
books
yeah,
love
absolutely.
drugs as power. They love drugs as power. But one of my favorite characters, if you're talking about drugs in comic books, is a combination of power and control, which is interesting. And that's Frank Miller's Nuke, who popped up
Oh
in
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Daredevil.
yeah.
Give me a red, give me a red. No, just whites and blues, where he's been addicted by the government and they control him through these drugs, but these drugs give him power.
Right.
So that's another, like I say, comics love the drugs and power, but there you get a little bit of the control in there too, and that makes him kind of cool.
Well, and the other thing is, again, we get into this nuance about drugs being used for good or ill. Captain America, because we were on the right side, to truth and justice and anti-fascism, the
Hmm.
drug they gave to Steve Rogers was great. It was perfect. That's exactly what you need to do.
Yeah, it was
But
a
then in the
super steroid.
yes, and then but in the hands of others, the communists or the fascists, then the same super soldier serum is terrible and awful.
Hmm.
So drugs are a bit like superpowers in themselves in that they don't change you, they just magnify your true nature.
Hmm.
So superpowers are kind of almost a metaphor for drugs anyway, or the other way around, drugs are a metaphor for superpowers.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can see that.
But let's talk about one of my favorite ones, and just because of where it comes from, William Burroughs.
We're going that route, huh?
We are going that route, and William Burroughs is definitely in the science fiction camp. The drug I'm talking about here, well, the book is Naked Lunch. So
Which,
Naked Lunch is his book about his terrible addiction to heroin.
mhm.
And the folks in Naked Lunch are addicted to a drug called black meat. And
I
black
have
meat,
not read this book, so you're going into completely unknown territory for me. So I'm very interested here.
so black meat is a drug you get from a species of centipede, which can become 6 feet long. And it's an interesting drug because it's a great metaphor for heroin. Because if you eat black meat, you get violently nauseated,
Hmm.
but you also have this incredible feeling of bliss. And so this is just kind of an interesting, it's an interesting dichotomy because you have to seek out this rare kind of creature to get it. So it's very, very hard to get. And it's a disgusting creature. And drugs, if you become addicted, make you do really disgusting things. Use dirty needles, exchange, sexual favors and contract STDs to get these things. But on the other hand, the feeling of bliss you get is so magical and so euphoric that you can't live without it.
Hmm.
And this is just his way of trying to describe both the beauty and ugliness he saw as a heroin addict. I mean, he was William, let me just tell you this. William S. Burroughs and Keith Richards had a lot in common. When Keith Richards was addicted to heroin, he was a homeless street person in Toronto for years.
He was.
Oh, definitely, definitely. He would spend weeks on the streets in Toronto uh, looking for drugs. He didn't live in a big mansion. I mean, it was almost the end of the Rolling Stones.
Hmm.
And Burroughs was the same way. So you got these two incredibly talented artists, but their drug addictions are really just ruining their careers.
Hmm.
And it's Keith Richards. I like what Robin Williams said. He said, "If there's a cure for AIDS, it's in Keith Richards' blood somewhere." But both of them kind of really eloquently deal with their addiction. Keith Richards through song and William S. Burroughs through this book. It is a very tough book to read because it's so just disjointed and strange. But talking cockroaches and black meat,
Hmm.
drugs. But anyway, it's one of these things that's at the center. And instead of trying to be judgmental, the book Naked Lunch, he tries to make you understand what it is like to be addicted,
Hmm.
what it is like to know that you are doing terrible things to yourself and other people, but constantly be in search of this incredible euphoria.
Addiction as a theme is, of course, common, and it's not necessarily tied to drugs. But if you're talking about drug culture,
Yeah,
a lot of times these sort of peripheral addictive things. One thing I'm thinking of is Existenz from David Cronenberg, the king of body horror here,
right.
where it's not actually a drug per se. Um, or Strange Days, that's another good one. The Catherine Bigelow movie
Mhm.
with Rafe Fiennes. Have you ever seen that one? That is
No,
on my
I
list.
did not see that movie. I wanted to, but I never did see it.
Yeah, go check that out. That's on my list. If we ever do another episode, way back when, the beginning of this show years ago, one of the first things we did was a show where we all listed our favorite underrated sci-fi
Yeah.
genre movies. Strange Days was not on my list, and it should have been. Terrific movie where
Yeah.
there's our main character is addicted and is a dealer of memories, basically. And
Well, it's interesting because as you get further and further in time in science fiction, you begin to understand addiction not just from physical substances, but addiction to the internet, addiction. And I've got a great one that's everywhere in science fiction, and it's a drug we naturally produce,
oh, which one is that? Like DMT or
adrenaline.
oh, adrenaline.
There are lots of characters throughout science fiction who are addicted to the thrill of doing things just because they're dangerous.
Adrenaline junkies. We even call them
And
junkies.
but adrenaline is a powerful thing, and it like drugs can determine your survival or your demise. Like commercial drugs. So I want to wrap this up by talking about one of my favorite things,
Oh, sure.
Firefly Serenity. So if you watch Firefly, the government, the alliance government is after River. We're gonna got to get River back. We got to get River back. We got to get
Mhm.
River back. But during the TV show, you don't really ever know why. That's the big central mystery. What is it River knows that the government doesn't want people to know? What's her secret? What's the terrible mystery? And of course, I don't know. There's something, I'm not going to spoil it, but there's something special about the way River perceives the world
Hmm.
that would make her dangerous to any government. But that's not really the reason why they're worried about her. she has a secret about something the Alliance did when they settled a planet. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds here to move away and not listen to this portion of the podcast. But here's
You've
what happened.
been warned.
Yeah, we have to reveal the central mystery here to understand the drug culture because I think this particular drug encapsulates everything we talked about.
It's a
Um,
good one too, and I think especially I think of apocalyptic drugs again.
Apocalyptic drug, social
Mhm.
control drug,
Yeah,
drugs as a way to destroy individual liberty. I think it really rounds out our whole conversation.
that's true. We got three elements that we've talked about distinctly from each other right there.
So the long name of this drug is G23 Paxilon hydrochloride.
Oh, that's right. God, this movie's coming back to me now. I haven't seen this movie in a while, and I do remember I really loved it. I think it works as a standalone movie.
It definitely
Even if
does.
you've never seen Firefly, you should
Yeah.
encourage
You do
anybody to
not
see
need
that.
to see Firefly to see Serenity.
Right.
It is a great movie that tells a great story by itself. Will you enjoy Serenity? I think more if you see Firefly first. Absolutely.
Oh, some things in it will have much more of an emotional impact.
And it'll resonate as an entire work of a complete work of fiction if you see both, but it's not necessary. So what's River's horrible secret? River's horrible secret is they settle a planet. So the whole point of Firefly or the whole structure of Firefly, the setup is that Earth gets used up. So they go and terraform hundreds of other planets and create this new universe. The planets at the center want to take control of all the planets and run them together. And the outer planets kind of like their individual liberty. So they rebel. There's a big war, and the outer planets lose. River's big secret is that in settling one of these planets that's really unhappy about being controlled by the Alliance, they pump a drug into the atmosphere, and it's G23 Paxilon hydrochloride. And
Right.
this is done to kind of just pacify the
Mhm.
citizens of the planet. Miranda. The planet is called Miranda, and it's done to pacify them. And 99.99% of the population it works on, but it works too well. So what happens with these people is they just give up the will to live. They're so pacified by the drug,
Mhm.
they just wait for death. So all activity on the planet ceases. And
Mhm.
what happens is uh, they River leads them to Miranda, which is deep in Reaver territory. And the Reavers are the big bads of the whole universe. They're these wild, cannibalistic, out of control former humans who rape and pillage and cannibalize and destroy a whole planet at a time. Well, it turns out the government accidentally created the Reavers
Because they're the
because
ones.
although
Yeah.
because although 99.99% of the planet was so pacified they gave up their own lives, the other 0.01% turned into raving, self-disfiguring cannibals,
Mhm.
and they terrorized the rest of the galaxy, the rest of the galaxy.
And there's that
And
theme again. There's a lot of themes, but there's that theme of the drug, the losing your will to live, or losing your will to not so much losing their will to live, but their will to do anything. It's not that everybody wanted to die. There was no suicidal element to it. It's much like the Doctor Who episode I was talking about. So that's a theme that I'm sure that I'd like to mine that theme more sometime, just on
yeah.
time, because I bet that's something there are more examples of. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I agree. That's I'm sure there are. But so this wraps it all up. And Mal, he decides he's got to get this news out to the rest of the verse because this is what happens when you let a giant bureaucracy as the Alliance take over your liberty.
Hmm.
So
He says try to make people better.
that's right. Well, we're going to make it so that everybody's calm and there's no conflict, and we don't have any fighting over resources or fighting over nationalism or whatever. But what happens is you take away individual action.
Hmm.
And individual action, the main theme of the movie is that individual action is what makes us human.
Right.
The ability to choose what we want to do, even if it's to choose the bad thing. So I think this is a great example of a depiction of drug culture in all three of these different things that we talked about. It also talks about power because the Alliance can't deal with the Reavers.
Hmm.
There's the giant monolithic government, and every time the Reavers show up, they just decimate whatever's around. And so it's an interesting example of the use of drug culture. And it, you know, the intent is there for the medicine to be good, but then it's terrible. Also, I just thought of another one, uh, just as a last resort here, and it's a bit of a stretch. Wally,
Yeah.
what are we addicted to? Slothfulness.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you've got machines doing everything for you and you don't have to do anything but consume, 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 consume. And then when there's too much trash on the planet and you've killed all the flora and fauna, what do? Well, the machines take you off to space and you get bigger and fatter and lazier. And who saves us? Robots.
Robots. The same. Yeah. The same things keeping us down save us, by God.
So here's the thing that I'm going to start doing from now on in the podcast, John, where you think we have to have an obligatory reference to Star Trek. I'm going to start looking for obligatory references to Firefly.
Oh, I know. That's no you ain't hiding that agenda here.
Yeah, but I'm declaring my intentions now. I've done a rewatch of it, and it's only 14 episodes, and I've watched it twice all the way through now.
The only thing you
And
didn't mention
yeah.
was Buffy in terms of your obligatory mentions.
Oh,
And I
yeah. Well,
can't
no,
think of a good Buffy example unless you want to talk about vampirism in general, which is a
magic,
whole other thing here, but yeah,
magic.
an addiction thing. But that's something we covered a little bit when we talked about vampires. So we don't
No,
need.
it's magic.
Mhm.
Willow gets addicted to magic and goes evil.
Oh, and there's magic too. Yeah, of course. I
So
remember that.
magic is the addiction, is the other addiction. So vampires and Angel and magic and Buffy.
There you go. We did get Buffy in there
All
after.
right. So see, it's your fault.
Yeah, it is. I did it this time. All right, folks. Well, we could talk about drugs all day because
Dude.
but it's time to get going. I'm going to finish my glass of wine, my own personal drug right here, and we'll get back and see you guys in a couple weeks with
Yep.
something else good. You know, one of the things I would like to return to is now that I had mentioned it before is at some point let's talk about overlooked and underappreciated films or books. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, let's
Absolutely.
do it. All right, that won't be next time, but it'll be soon. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Our theme music is by Christopher Piatek.